Hey dudes, and welcome back to The Bants. As always, I am your host, The Bants. And as you can see, it is finally Friday, which means it is time to continue on with our list week videos. And in this video today, we are going to be covering my top 5 favorite streetwear brands out of 2018. So I'm sure this is the one video that most of you have probably been waiting for. And believe me, I was pretty excited to make it as well. And I have to say that I was actually pretty pleasantly surprised with how many smaller and younger brands actually made it onto the list this year. But with that now said, let's just get right into it. And up first, as per usual, are my honorable mentions. Although this time I actually have 3 brands that I wanted to cover. And starting off our honorable mentions list is the brand Bianca Chandon. Being one of the better frontrunners coming out of this psychedelic DIY movement, though definitely one of the smaller brands in this movement as well. What we see here is a decent amount of variety in their products, all of which are actually made in the US or Canada, so that's a nice little addition as well. And even if when it comes down to their graphics they're not the most interesting overall regarding this style, they're still plenty better than the majority of the brands still popping up nowadays. On the other hand though, some of their more unique pieces, such as their tie-dyes or even some of the vintage repurposed fabric pieces they did earlier this year, are absolutely incredible and definitely the highlight of what they do. But just like many other psych DIY brands out there, they're definitely on the smaller side, with very few collections and almost even fewer pieces, hence the reason why they're in the honorable mentions. But if they can keep up what they're doing, they'll definitely be worth looking forward to in the future, so if you're a fan of this style, definitely be on the lookout for them. And up next in my honorable mentions list is the very new brand Almost Always. Now, streetwear companies pop up all the time, but very rarely do any have such a strong debut as Almost Always did here. And with having some of the strongest graphics I've seen out of any streetwear company this past year, new or old, it's pretty easy to see why. Though, as I said when I talked about them before, they do seem to be pretty heavily influenced by Undercover. But by no means are they a direct copy in the same way that many other brands fail nowadays. Undercover can definitely be seen as an influence here, but Almost Always originality still shines through. Add in a heavy splash of color and products that are all made in America, and you have the makings of something really great. However, as I said before, this is still a very new company, as this is their first year and they've only put out 2 seasons, hence why they're an honorable mention. But even knowing that, I'm still very excited to see what comes of them over the next couple years. And lastly, the third and final brand on my honorable mentions list is Life's a Beach. Usually when it comes to streetwear, the concept is pretty easy to understand. They're smaller companies based on a plethora of different influences and inspirations, but the main thing they all have in common is that their designs are heavily based on graphics. So with that said, I was very surprised to see a company like Life's a Beach even exist. Sure, they do have a couple of pieces with more standard graphics here and there, but the majority of their pieces are more abstract graphically, in the sense of their overall designs or placement on the pieces. And there's actually plenty of times where they've just ditched graphics altogether and solely relied on all-over prints instead, most of which are actually pretty interesting in their own rights. And the fact that they have one of the largest selections of apparel per season, meaning that you get a ton of these more abstract graphics and all-over prints, really doesn't hurt either. So if you've been looking for something a little bit different graphically in streetwear, or maybe you're just a fan of all-over prints, either way, these guys are definitely worth the look. Alright, it is now finally time to move on into our main list, and starting us off at number 5 is the still relatively unknown Dominate Jakarta. Now, out of all the streetwear companies I found out about this year, Dominate is definitely by far the one that impressed me the most. And to give you an idea of what they're like, think back to all the more popular Japanese legacy streetwear brands, such as Neighborhood and Dub Taps and brands like that. Well, Dominate is taking the styles that they've become so synonymous with and is just blowing them out of the water. I mean, just take a look at some of these fits here. They're absolutely fucking phenomenal. From their silhouettes to their fabrics, their graphics, and so on. Everything that I see here is just super on point. And while yes, some may argue that these are just blatant ripoffs, and while in some ways, yes, I'd actually agree, the fact of the matter is that while most of the companies I previously mentioned have been more experimenting with their styles and designs these last few seasons, Dominate has been picking up the slack in their place, and they've been doing a damn fine job at it too, especially if you're regarding their prices. Because surprise, surprise, this brand isn't actually out of Japan. It's out of Indonesia. So if you are a fan of that heavily influenced Japanese streetwear style, highly recommend checking these guys out. Some very great pieces for some very great prices. Okay, and coming in next at number 4 is the absolutely crazy and absurd brand Advisory Board Crystals. Looks like it's time to go back to that psychedelic and DIY genre. Even though, as I said before, there are a bunch of companies leading the pack when it comes to this style, such as Bianca Chandon and Cactus Plant Flea Market, nobody's doing anything quite like Advisory Board Crystals. And if I had to sum up this brand in just one word, insane is probably the word that would describe it. From the insane amount of colors they use to the insane amount of graphics and styles. But even more so than all of that, I have to highlight the insane level of detail they put into some of their pieces. It's just fucking madness. Whether it's an extensively thought out graphic, or a completely vibrant tie-dye, or the verbose definition of a crystal on a liner, or even fucking crystals sewn into the clothing themselves. Or hell, it might even just be a combination of all these things. Not one thing, not one detail is overlooked when it comes to their pieces. And honestly, the amount of creativity that comes out of some of their designs just blows me away. Because once again, who even fucking thinks about sewing crystals into their clothes? So if you are a fan of this style, definitely check out Advisory Board Crystals. They are really on a whole nother level. And now coming in at number 3 is another brand that you probably all suspected to be on this list, and that is of course Kith. And once again, probably a surprise to no one. But it's pretty crazy, isn't it? For one brand to not only make the streetwear list, but also the collaborations list, and even the techwear list. But honestly, the only reason they did is because they deserve it. And you know what the really funny thing is? Even for as much as I've praised them and highlighted them over the past year, I'm really not even a big fan of the brand. I don't own anything from them, I don't want anything from them, and I have no intentions of buying from them anytime soon either. But it's just as I always say, I have to give credit where credit is due. And it doesn't matter if Ronnie had to hire 8 other designers to get that credit, because whatever the reason, in the end, he still deserves it. Really quality designs, great collaborations, and excellent choices when it comes to fabrics, materials, and patterns, finished off with some fun and interesting design details that seem to just wind up on each and every piece. So overall, just a really solid brand, probably the most solid out there at this point in time, and yeah, there's really not much else to say. Then, coming in at number 2 is actually the only tie on our list, and it comes in the forms of Wacko Maria and Beslow Purple Label. Now, over the years, the term Supreme Killer gets thrown around around every once in a while. Although realistically, most companies that get coined with this term either end up fizzling out or just going on to copy Supreme's style. And even though there's a slew of reasons as to why I don't think anyone will actually ever end up becoming a Supreme killer, unfortunately, I do actually believe that if these two brands right here were just a little bit more accessible and upped their production just a tiny bit, they would actually probably get as close as anyone could to being a Supreme killer. And for those of you who already know somewhat of Wacko Maria, think of Beslow Purple Label as their Korean counterpart. Both fall closely in that Supreme style. And by that, I mean they just have an insane and absolutely incredible amount of different designs and pieces and apparel for sale every season. Whether you're looking for a nice graphic, a quality pullover, or even a blazer to throw on top of both of these things, they have all of this and plenty more. The only difference is that where Supreme normally fails in their designs, both these two brands, Wacko Maria and Beslow Purple Label, absolutely excel. Better graphics, better embroideries, better patterns, better fabrics, better materials, better designs, better silhouettes, more hints at contemporary, more hints at sleazecore. And when you put these brands side by side, you'll notice just all the tiny little differences between both of them. You'll notice there are things that you'll like in one brand that you don't like on the other, and you notice the pros and cons on one brand and vice versa on the other. But that's totally okay, because there's just so much originality and creativity to take into these brands that's just what makes them special. But then when you throw Supreme into the equation, comparing all three brands now, it's really no contest as to just how poor Supreme is in comparison. I really do mean what I said at the beginning of this number 2 spot. If these brands just had a few more eyes on them and just had a little bit more output, they would really just be forces to reckon with. So if you are a fan of this style, I cannot recommend enough going to check these two brands out. Sure, it might take a little bit more time and effort to track them down because once again, they really aren't the easiest to get your hands on. But if you can get your hands on some of these products, believe me, they are definitely worth it. Alright guys, we've finally made it to the end of the list, to my number 1 pick, my favorite streetwear brand out of 2018. And this choice might surprise some of you, and for others who've been following the channel for a while, it probably won't, just based on how much I've talked about it and gushed about it over the last year. But without further ado, my number 1 brand, my favorite streetwear brand out of 2018 is by far and above Elhaus. I fucking love Elhaus. And yes, I understand that this might be a little bit of an odd pick, but even so, I really don't care. To explain Elhaus briefly, it's basically an amalgamation of everything I like. They have roots in streetwear, they have roots in workwear, they even have roots in techwear, and they even do a very nice amount of patchwork on top of all of this. So it might seem like a little bit of a stretch to put them here, seeing as that they're not fully streetwear. But even with everything they have going on, at the end of the day, it still feels more like a streetwear brand than anything else, so here it stays. Which is also why it didn't show up in the techwear list, and why it won't show up in the contemporary list either. But now moving on into the brand itself. Very few companies, big or small, care about their product as much as Elhaus does. Literally from the ground up, they start with some of the most interesting and cool fabrics I've seen anybody use nowadays. Then from there, they put together some of the most interesting designs you can think of, and finally they finish off their pieces with some of the best details I've ever seen in this style. And what we end up with are not only some fantastic pieces, but also some of the most creative hybrids from these genres that I think actually exist to date. And the thing that's probably craziest about all of this, crazier than the materials, crazier than the designs is just how much they're selling these pieces for. Because this is also another brand out of Jakarta. Indonesia has just honestly been killing it the last few years. And the most expensive thing I've ever seen on their site wasn't even over $200. In fact, the majority of their pieces actually come in at under $150. So once again, just go back through some of the images I posted while talking about Elhaus. Look at some of the designs, look at some of the details, look at just how intricate some of these things are. And none of it is over $200. Not one single thing. If anything like this was produced in America, double or even triple its price. And if it was made in Japan, add a 0 to the back of it. And they're able to do all of that for this price. It's just incredible. So when you have a company that is priced this well and is also putting out some of the most creative pieces out of anybody, it doesn't matter if you're talking streetwear, techwear, contemporary, or even luxury fashion. It's honestly a no-brainer why they're number one and why Elhaus is my streetwear brand of 2018. And with that, guys, we've reached the end of my top 5 streetwear list. I hope you guys have enjoyed. And with that, it's time once again to pass off some questions to you. Do you agree with my list? Do you disagree with my list? Is there any brand you think I overlooked that should have been here? Is there any brands that should have switched places, maybe been somewhere else on this list? Whatever your thoughts, please throw them in the comments down below. I'm always interested to hear what you guys have to say. And with that, thank you guys all once again for watching these videos and supporting my content. I hope you all have a great weekend ahead of you, and as always, until next time.